if we're going to look back at this and say, this is the individual that is going to be inserted as the Governor General, who has a duty by her sworn oath to uphold the King's sworn oath to govern Canada based on Christian principles. Another comment that she makes is that one, she is fully behind the mass migration, and she believes that any fears of foreigners coming in and changing the social fabric of Canada, she dismisses that idea, and that Canada should embrace a future in which our children, think about this, in which our children will develop their own culture fully open to that of others. So again, I want to ask, how can Louise Arbour possibly uphold her role as the Governor General? And so we're going to be commencing a campaign targeting Mark Carney and requesting that he reassess Louise Arbour's position, her suitability to be the Governor General. And as David digs into the Coronation Oath and helps to educate us, you will understand why. And this should have all of us very concerned, because the global agenda is targeting Canada very specifically, and they mean to wipe out our freedoms, our democracy, and everything that our founding fathers had created and gifted us with. We are in a war, and we are in a fight for our lives in Canada. Well, welcome everyone to tonight's Empower Hour. I'm really looking forward to this. We have David Lindsay on with us tonight. And as you can see, going across Canada right now, we have, and in the last 11 years, a lot of legislation that has been passed that's running roughshod over our Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the Constitution and the rule of law. And we're all kind of dismayed looking back and saying, how do we stop this? And David Lindsay and myself have been on the front line of elevating the conversation regarding the Coronation Oath, and that all documents that have come after the oath, such as the Constitution, the BNA Act, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, must comply with the oath. And the oath says that Canada must be governed by Judeo-Christian biblical principles. And we need to move this forward in order to save Canada. And that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. And when I say that we need this conversation to be front and center, we need it to be front and center in the legislature. We need it to be front and center in the House of Commons. And we need to revoke legislation in the last 11 years that is in violation of it. But in order to do that, we need to be educated. And Action for Canada, along with David Lindsay, is working to lobby government, MPs, MLAs, MPPs, and bring awareness to this incredibly important agreement. David is the founder and president of CLEAR, Common Law Education and Rights. And, you know, we've had you on the show multiple times on this issue. I think you're the only one that I know that is an actual expert on the oath, and why we've brought you on the show so many times in order to bring this forward and help educate citizens. And now we are really working on this campaign to lobby government, because I've always said knowledge is power. Most of the sitting MPs and MLAs, nobody knows about it. They don't understand that the oath is binding and how powerful it is to taking back Canada. We're going to play a clip that I think is very relevant on who Carney has just appointed or selected or inserted as the next Governor General. And it will highlight who the new Governor General is that's been inserted by Mark Carney, and an upcoming campaign where I think it's very important to appeal to Mark Carney to reassess her suitability.
So last week, we all saw King Charles in Washington trying to save the post-war order. This week, Mark Carney was in Armenia, admitting that the original version of that order is ruptured and needs to be retooled. Charles brought the pageantry. Carney is building the successor system. Now look at the countries that Carney identified who are supposed to comprise that successor system. Canada, the European Union, the United Kingdom, Australia. That's the Anglosphere, plus the European imperial remnant. That is not a coalition of democracies. That's the British imperial system's remaining structure, consolidating against the American system of Donald Trump and what he's trying to revive. And the rest of the cast of characters in Armenia included the usual has-beens: Keir Starmer, Emmanuel Macron, Ursula von der Leyen. You get the picture. But when Carney returned from Armenia to Canada, he made an announcement in Ottawa. He appointed a new Governor General of Canada. Now, the media covers it as a routine administrative appointment. That's not what it was. Carney didn't just name the name of the new Governor General. He described the office itself.
The Crown is a continuous thread through our constitutional life. It is, as His Majesty himself said, a symbol of Canada in all her richness and dynamism. And the Governor General is the Crown's representative in Canada, Commander-in-Chief of the Canadian Armed Forces, steward of our traditions.
Now pay close attention to what Carney said. The Crown is not a symbol. It permeates Canada's constitutional life, and it wields the real power. Most people, including many Canadians, probably assume it's the Prime Minister who commands the military. He doesn't. The Crown's representative does. Remember that. Then he added this.
The Governor General is the guardian of our constitutional order. The most demanding part of that role is rarely seen. It's the duty to ensure that government in Canada is formed, sustained, and, when the time comes, dismissed in accordance with law and convention.
Dismissed. The Governor General can dismiss the government. That's how he chose to describe the ultimate power of the office he was about to fill. Because the people of Canada are not sovereign. The king is the sovereign. And I want you to remember that when you look at how Carney has been given the public portfolio to try and reshape the empire's rules-based order. Now, if you're beginning to get the idea of how the imperial system continues to operate, that it's really the real name for what a lot of you call globalization, then you need to subscribe to Promethean Action's free newsletter. We're going to show you how President Trump is taking on that imperial system and just how much of a threat he is to its controllers. The link is in the description, because you're going to get a bigger picture of what this fight looks like when I tell you just who it was that Mark Carney appointed as Governor General. Her name is Louise Arbour, and her appointment tells you everything about what rebuilding the rules-based order actually means in practice. Arbour built her career as chief prosecutor of the United Nations International Criminal Tribunals for both Yugoslavia and Rwanda. These were the first such tribunals since Nuremberg. And from that platform, she became one of the most prominent advocates for creating a permanent international criminal court. She delivered the opening statement at the launch of the NGO coalition for the ICC's global ratification, and she pushed governments to sign the statute. She described the ICC as the necessary evolution from the tribunal she ran, turning them into a permanent standing institution. So while she didn't work for the ICC, she built the political and legal movement that brought it into existence. She did it from the inside the same apparatus that George Soros was funding from the outside. Here's what Soros's Open Society said in a document they published on March 19th, 2018, about their relationship to the ICC. The Justice Initiative works closely with the International Criminal Court, helping it function as efficiently and effectively as possible, assisting local human rights advocates in gathering and presenting information of use to the ICC, pursuing advocacy and public education with governments to secure support for the ICC, and contributing to building the capacity of the ICC staff. So Arbour's career, the very same Arbour who's now the Governor General of Canada, helped build the legitimacy for the court that George Soros funded. And that apparatus then produced Jack Smith. Before he was appointed special counsel to prosecute Donald Trump, Jack Smith spent 2 years inside the ICC's Office of the Prosecutor in The Hague, the institution that Arbour championed and Soros funded. He then went to the Kosovo Specialist Chambers, and that was the direct successor to Arbour's Yugoslavia Tribunal. This is the same legal framework and the same mandate. Then Jack Smith brought it home, and he was handed a domestic target, Donald Trump. So Carney just made the architect of that entire project Canada's Governor General, the officer with the power to dismiss a government and command its military. This is not a coincidence. That's not a personnel decision. That is a signal delivered just as Carney is trying to rally what is left of the empire against Donald Trump's world of sovereign nations.
It is so important that people understand the role and who Louise Arbour is. And when it's interesting that when Mark Carney was describing her and the crown, that he neglected to talk about the Coronation Oath. And I think that was very intentional. In this clip, they mentioned that Louise Arbour would be the commander of our military. One of the statements that she made, which has been reported on by Epoch Times, is, listen, this is a direct quote. If you just recruit white boys who like guns, but don't like women or anybody who doesn't look like them, you'll perpetuate that culture. If we're going to look back at this and say, this is the individual that is going to be inserted as the Governor General, who has a duty by her sworn oath to uphold the King's sworn oath to govern Canada based on Christian principles. Another comment that she makes is that one, she is fully behind the mass migration, and she believes that any fears of foreigners coming in and changing the social fabric of Canada, she dismisses that idea, and that Canada should embrace a future in which our children, think about this, in which our children will develop their own culture fully open to that of others. So again, I want to ask, how can Louise Arbour possibly uphold her role as the Governor General? And so we're going to be commencing a campaign targeting Mark Carney and requesting that he reassess Louise Arbour's position, her suitability to be the Governor General. And as David digs into the Coronation Oath and helps to educate us, you will understand why. And this should have all of us very concerned, because the global agenda is targeting Canada very specifically, and they mean to wipe out our freedoms, our democracy, and everything that our founding fathers had created and gifted us with. We are in a war, and we are in a fight for our lives in Canada. So David, please, let's comment on that, and then I look forward to your presentation.
Hi, good evening. Thank you. I think that the video by the woman in the States is absolutely correct and accurate to a T. Louise Arbour is a staunch globalist, and everything she talks about is globalism. Everything she promotes is globalism. She's with a major global law firm based out of Montreal, Quebec, and everything that they are that she is promoting involves the destruction of our nation and our culture, and promoting internationalism, globalism, however you want to refer to it. And you can't serve two masters. You cannot serve God and serve our country and at the same time serve international issues. It's not going to work. So it's something that I think her appointment is contradictory to the office itself. And it's like pointing an atheist to a position where you have to support and promote God. How are you going to do it? And you can't. So I'm not sure how she's going to respond, but I did send a letter to her today, and I specifically requested a meeting for us to meet with her to discuss, hopefully prior to her appointment, to discuss the duties of her office, and so that hopefully we can make her aware that in the capacity of a Governor General, you cannot give royal assent to legislation that violates God's laws in the Bible, period. And that went off to her this afternoon, and I hope we hear back within the next day or two on that.
Right. And thank you for that, David. And she has said very clearly, again, publicly, that she is open to meeting with people with, a different opinion than herself. And that's one of the reasons why why you've already sent it today, but that's one of the reasons why we're pursuing this meeting with Louise Arbour, who will be sworn in on June 8th. And so Mary Simons remains in this position. But this is also very important to address this issue in the light that Bill C-9 right now is before the Senate. And it is right now they're listening to witnesses. I've had information from senators' offices who have sent the list to the Senate of all of the people that they would like to be heard, and they're only accepting about a third of them. And there's many, many Canadians and Christians and non-Christians who are concerned about the step to criminalize scripture and have pastors who will be self-censoring, maybe out of fear or being apprehensive about quoting scripture. And again, this is in violation of the Coronation Oath. Susan Kokinda is the one from Promethean Action. I should have mentioned that earlier when we played that clip. And I would really encourage people to follow her. She and a team do some of the best investigative reporting on issues, and she's in America, but they do a lot of reporting on Canada because it is very relevant to them what Carney is doing, his alignments with China and the EU, how that is affecting Canadian sovereignty, and of course, posing a greater and greater threat to the United States. So all in all, they have reasons to be concerned. We're very concerned about what's happening in Canada. The Coronation Oath also addresses the mass migration, people integrating and assimilating into our culture and embracing our belief systems. And that is fair, not only to expect it, but to demand it. And so, David, with that, I'd like to hand the floor over to you, and I look forward to your presentation.
Thank you. We've talked about this on a few occasions in the past, and without doubt, the oath is the most important document and the longest standing document in our Constitution, and it's there for a reason. And, if you look back historically, every culture and society that has turned its back on God has suffered the consequences. And when people first wanted a king, they specifically were asking why they wanted a king, because they were free already. And as a result, they were given a king, and they were told, as long as your king follows God's laws, you will prosper, and if you don't, you will suffer. Consequently, they, for the most part, have not followed God's laws. A few have, and they prospered under those circumstances. So I think it's important that people realize that we need to get our culture back from the immigration problem that we're having and the attempt to secularize Canada. And in that context, Tanya, both of us have been the first that I'm aware of to actually demand that our elected officials and the Governor General uphold the Coronation Oath in the capacities and in their duties. Nobody else has done this before. And essentially, a couple people have been aware of it, but it's something that nobody has ever actually focused on and tried to say, listen, we're going to uphold you to these promises you made under oath. And we've been doing that since December. And we've had a lot of notices sent in, and this is the first time that this has actually happened. And I'm hoping that we're going to get results in the near future. But it's important to remember this is the first time that this has happened, and we're going to have to educate a lot of people who are not aware of what we are talking about. So having said that, let's get right into the presentation. What I would do if I was talking to my government officials, my elected officials, my MPs, and so on, this is essentially what I would be starting to talk to them about. And first thing I want to establish with them is that God's laws are supreme in our law. And that's the first thing. Most of them are not aware of it. They're raised under the charter, they believe in multiculturalism, and they're not aware that God's law is supreme, the Christian God. And that's the first thing I want to establish. Then I want to talk about their duties as kings and queens, the oath, and then their duties as elected officials and what they're obligated to do. So let's talk about the first thing with God being supreme. If you're going to talk to your elected officials, you need to convince them that God is supreme. And once you've done that, because the next question is, you swore an oath of allegiance to the king. How can you serve two masters if you don't know what they mean? The most important part of everything is the beginning. And this is why I want so much to focus on the supremacy of God in our law, because that is the beginning and has been there for 1100 years. And then essentially all our provinces adopted that from England into our law as well. And this is why it's so important for them to understand that God is supreme in our law. So the law of England, whether it's statutory or customary, people think if it's a statute, it can override God's laws, and it cannot. And what I'm showing you today, believe me, is just a sample, a very small sample of our documents that we have in our presentation that me and Terenzio and Heather did a few years ago. And it's just critical to understand that all our laws have to conform with the laws of God. And Broome said, quoting Blackstone, that it's superior to other others, and no human laws are of any effect or of any force if are contrary to God's laws. So, essentially, that applies not only politically, but in our courts as well. And Lord Denning pointed out years ago, one of the best things that the English had was that Christians were appointed to judges. Today, that's not the case. And when you got somebody who believes in Islam or swearing in the Quran, they're not going to establish and uphold God's laws in the courtroom, and they should not be sitting there. And that's a real problem, because you've sworn an oath to the king to uphold God's laws, and you cannot do that if you don't believe in God. But it is a principle of our law that all proceedings in our courts are founded on the laws of God as well. And that's all based on our common law. And the reason I emphasize the common law is because it has been with us from the beginning. It got passed down from generation to generation back before printing existed, based on principles that existed in the Bible. And those principles all were biblically based. And as a result, they were passed on from generation because people couldn't read. And when the printing press came and the Bible came out, then they got passed down that way as well. But by then, they were already part of our common law. And the fundamental principle of our common law is that everything is permitted that is not forbidden by law. So whereas European and every other form of law in the world says you can do what the government tells you to do, I want our MPs to know that in Canada and our MLAs that it's the exact opposite. We're entitled to do whatever is not expressly prohibited. And that does not mean the people in power can prohibit and do whatever they want in the exercise of their powers. I want our elected officials to know that our freedom is unbounded. That is the starting point. And these principles, again, came from the Bible. Do unto others as you would have done unto you, and do not do unto others. And they're pretty straightforward. And civil law is pretty simple. Keep all your contracts that you're making and don't infringe on the rights and freedoms of others. You will not find a better system of law anywhere in the world. So when people in Alberta want to separate, I ask them, and I've yet to get an answer, what law are you going to replace it with that's better than our common law that you have right now? And I have never got an answer from anybody at all yet. One of the best things about common law is it doesn't recognize any other form of law. So it doesn't recognize what's happening in our country. It doesn't recognize secularism, communism, socialism, or any other form of law. The common law is there, and it is our law, and that's why I call it a republican monarchy, because the law cannot be changed. If it is attempted to be changed, it's being done illegally and unconstitutionally by somebody with a lot of power. And if there's a conflict, the thing about the common law is very clear. If there's a conflict between statutes and God's laws prevail. I want our MPs to know that when they swear an oath to uphold the king, they have a duty, when they vote, to vote against bills that are contrary to the Bible. And folks, this is the starting point for your power of peaceful civil disobedience in Canada to any legislation that does not comply with God's laws in the Bible. You can absolutely sit back and say, I'm not complying with it, because it should never have been given royal assent and it violates the Bible. This is constitutionally permissible in Canada. And again, as I pointed out earlier, you can't serve two masters. So if you're going to serve in your capacity as an MP, an MLA, or Governor General, and if you're going to serve us and serve God, you cannot serve anybody else. And that remains let me rephrase that. That means that you are required in the exercise of your duties to uphold God's laws at all times. That common law followed the flag here in Canada, and we got it here now. And that came also in the BNA Act, where it says right in the opening preamble that we will have a constitution similar in principle to that of England and the United Kingdom. And as a result, all the great common law principles and everything we have in our common law got brought here and was incorporated in the BNA Act as well. It's now called the Constitution Act of 1867. And simply, I think everybody knows what a constitution is, but generally speaking, defined, it outlines the relationships between whoever is in charge in the state and the individuals who comprise the state. And it sets out limitations to the powers of those people who are in charge in the state. In the English law, it also sets out who is going to be successors to the throne, who is going to establish their sovereign territory, what it's going to be, where the flag is going to be planted, and the law that's going to be applied, which is our common law, of course. I want these MPs to know this. Most of these don't. And MLAs, they don't know anything about this. Anything. If you ask them to define a constitution, all they would tell you is the charter, for example. And our charter, our constitution, is more than that. It's significantly more. It's a series of documents that go back basically to Magna Carta. So these MPs and MLAs need to know that this isn't me just saying that. This is the Supreme Court of Canada saying that. It's a series of documents.
In times of financial uncertainty, safeguarding your assets is increasingly important. In response to ongoing inflation, economic challenges, and market instability, many Canadians are adopting the timeless strategy of investing in precious metals. Historically, gold and silver have held their value, safeguarding your assets against economic turmoil. Action for Canada is pleased to announce our partnership with Steve of Sun City Silver, providing valued members of A4C with expanded investment opportunities designed to help you achieve your financial goals. Steve is an ally of the Freedom Movement, and he's offering members of Action for Canada exclusive access to some of Canada's premier prices. By leveraging his connections with Silver Gold Bull, you can access competitive rates for securing your precious metals. Silver Gold Bull is a trusted Canadian leader, offering live pricing 24/7 and boasting nearly 400,000 five-star reviews on Trustpilot. For an order of $5,000, be sure to indicate you're an Action for Canada member and receive a complimentary 1967 silver dollar, courtesy of Sun City Silver. Expand your collection further by referring a new customer who places a similar order, and Steve will reward you with a special bonus thank you gift. Your purchase with Steve is a dual investment. You invest in your future while simultaneously supporting the Freedom Movement with a percentage of each sale benefiting Action for Canada. For more information, be sure to visit actionforcanada.com/purchasing-precious-metals/. Secure your assets. Protect your future. Support Action for Canada and the Freedom Movement. The information presented is for educational and informational purposes only and is not intended to provide financial, legal, or tax advice, as we are not licensed financial advisors, accountants, or attorneys and cannot provide professional counsel. Be advised that the content and information provided does not create a client relationship. We recommend you consult with a qualified professional advisor before making any financial, legal, or tax decisions. Please note that Action for Canada is not responsible for an individual's financial outcome. Remember, your decisions are your own, and we recommend doing your own research before making any investment.
So they need to know it's much more than the charter. I want them to know that. And I want them to know that it's not exhaustive. The Supreme Court of Canada also pointed out, and it says right in the Constitution Act of 82, Section 52 sub 2B, I think it is, that it uses the word includes. The Constitution of Canada includes, which means it's significantly broader than what is stated in the Constitution Act. So I'm going to tell these MPs, and I talked to them, some of them already, that the Constitution is much more exhaustive than that. And we need, every time you talk to an MP, they need to know it's much more than the Charter. And the Supreme Court of Canada has recognized that as well. Here are some of the documents. The BNA Act, Constitution Act of 1867, 82, the Statute of Westminster, and the Charter, of course. And then we have all these documents. The Bible, which was the beginning. You have Magna Carta. And keep in mind, some judges who are on power trips try to say Magna Carta is not part of our Constitution. And however, I want to point out, the King signed it in 1215, 1225, and 1297 in various amendments. It has the force of law insofar as it has not been repealed. And many sections have not. For example, you cannot sell justice. That is an unwritten principle of our Constitution, and it goes back to Magna Carta as well. The ones here you see in yellow are what are known as the rules of succession of the monarch. They set out how the monarch is getting appointed, who takes their place when they die, and what their powers and duties are to us. And they're extremely, extremely important. And here at the bottom, Pursuit of Happiness, for example, those are part of our unwritten Constitution. And that's where the Americans got it from, was the English law. They didn't just sit around a boardroom table and decide they were going to put it in there. They took the best out of the English law. So our Constitution is the supreme law, which includes the Coronation Oath. So if the oath is the supreme law, Mr. MP, you need to know that you cannot vote for anything that violates that Constitution and that oath, and you cannot have it both ways. If it violates the oath, you cannot vote for it, pure and simple. Every constitutional document in our history recognizes the supremacy of God. So you do not have the power to vote for anything that violates that at any time. Any bill that comes before you, you don't have that legal power, even if your Liberal MP or whip is telling you to do it. You've got two choices. You either violate your oath, or you vote for it, or I should say, or you don't vote for it and violate what the Liberal Party is telling you. Which is more important? And I tell you, it's the oath, because all power flows from that oath. You wouldn't be sitting there, Mr. MP or an MLA, if you didn't take that oath. And one of the things I like the best is that the Charter cannot be applied to derogate or take away from any other constitutional provisions. So you cannot use the Charter to say it overrides, for example, the BNA Act or the Coronation Oath. This is phenomenal. You can't come in and use the notwithstanding clause or anything, the Section 1 loophole. You can't use that to come in and say that we are going to have statutes take force and effect over the Coronation Oath. That cannot be done. And that's the benefit of the oath. There are no loopholes. And I love that. I just love it. And I want to talk about the property and an obligation, because the King swore these oaths to us and he has to uphold them. And it goes back to the principle that the King is not supreme. And there's the maxim. And this goes back 1,100 years, even though it's been violated for centuries, millennia. The law is still there that the King is not supreme. And the Crown cannot disregard the law. So, in other words, the King cannot come in and say, I'm going to pass a law that allows me to do something I can't do anyway, and because I passed it, it's now law. You cannot do that. You cannot pass a law allowing you to break the law. Very, very simple. And again, this is from a superior court out of the province of Quebec, but the principle is well known throughout our entire court system. And this includes contracts. If the king enters a contract, he has to comply with it, and he has to obey it, and he's not allowed to break it. The coronation oath is a contract, and they're not allowed to break it. And most of the MPs and MLAs and government officials fail to understand the protection versus subjection principle. That if you want to be subject to the king and have the protection of the king, then you obey his laws, limited by the fact that the king cannot just pass any law he wants. It's limited by your rights and freedoms that the king has sworn to protect as well. So it's a contract, absolutely. And what they do if the king does break it is they try to say that the king cannot do any wrong, and as a result, they try and blame it on all the councillors, ministers, and MPs and MLAs. And this is what I tell the MPs and MLAs. If you're going to be aiding and advising the king or through the Governor General in Canada to break their oath, you are responsible. You're the one that takes the legal and constitutional blame and should be voted out of office for doing that. Either you took an oath not knowing what it means, or you took an oath knowing what it means, and you're absolutely decided willingly to break that oath to the king and to the people, of course. But keep in mind, the oath of allegiance is to the king and to uphold God's laws. It's not a democratic principle. And you do not want democracy in any event. In a democracy, 50 plus 1% of the people can make the most horrific of acts lawful simply because the majority of people voted on it, right? But this is what they try to do to get away from the king being wrong, is they try to blame it on the councillors and ministers, meaning your MPs and MLAs and the Privy Council. And if they're breaking the law, they should be removed from office. And I want the members of Parliament and the legislatures to know why royal assent is even necessary in the first place from the king. And it's to protect the people from abuses from Parliament. In as much as the king was breaking the law for decades and centuries, and they had the thing that the king could do no wrong and he would just go out and do whatever he wanted to, this is to protect Parliament from doing the same thing that the Coronation Oath Act and Coronation Oath was there to protect in the first place, from kings and queens breaking the law and doing whatever they wanted. Now the king is there to make sure Parliament doesn't do what it wants and just breaks the law and takes away our rights and freedoms as well. And that's the main purpose of royal assent, is to make sure that parliamentary bills, legislative bills, comply with the coronation oath of the king, and to a lesser degree, the charter as well. Now, the Governor General is empowered under Section 55 to withhold royal assent if it violates God's laws. And the wording is very clear in Section 55 of the former BNA Act, now Constitution Act, that he shall declare according to his discretion, but subject to the provisions of the Act and Her Majesty's instructions, that he assents thereto, or he withholds it, or he reserves the bill for signification of the Queen's pleasure. There is nothing in here in the Constitution that expressly states that a Governor General is required by law to give royal assent to every bill passed by Parliament. Nothing. It's according to his discretion. And that means if the Governor General has a discretion, he has to use that discretion in accordance with the terms of his oath of allegiance to the king, and in turn, the king's coronation oath promises to us. And here are instances, for example, where a royal assent has been refused in Canada, and a lot of provincial lieutenant governors who also submit their bills to the Governor General for royal assent have been turned down over the years. So it has happened on a regular basis throughout our history that Governors General have refused to give royal assent, as have lieutenant governors. Here are general instances where it's been turned down. For example, if the king has been deceived, if he's been misled by MPs and MLAs or the Privy Council, then the royal assent is void from the beginning. If he's misinformed, if the language is so general that you cannot apply it, if it's couched in uncertain terms, so you cannot tell how to apply it with precision, and most importantly, if it would work a wrong or an injury or something contrary to law. If royal assent is given to any bill in Parliament or the legislature that works a wrong or an injury or is contrary to law, the law is set out in the oath. The contract makes the law. And if they give royal assent, it's completely unconstitutional and it's void from the beginning. This goes back to what I said earlier. Peaceful civil disobedience. It's void from the beginning. You can refuse to comply with it at that time. And this is something that our friend mentioned in the video a few minutes ago on the Governor General being head of the military in Canada. The King is actually. If Parliament tries to pass laws that violate the oath, the monarch, the King, is required to advise government to stop doing it. If the government refuses, then the King, through the Governor General, is required to dissolve Parliament. So when Carney spoke earlier about the power of the King to dissolve Parliament, this is one of the duties he has under these circumstances, if Parliament is breaking their oaths. And if the Parliament or the MP or PM refuses, the monarch can call in the armed forces because they are sworn in allegiance to the King. They are not sworn to Parliament or the Governor General or the Minister of Health or the Attorney General or anybody else. They are sworn to the King. And if necessary, the King can bring in the armed forces to eliminate Parliament if they've gone rancid and gone rogue. And they can bring in the armed forces. Everything is a pyramid that focuses with God on top and the King underneath and the House of Commons and everybody else below it. So let's just talk a few minutes on the oath that I would tell these MPs and MLAs about. The first thing I want them to know is how far back it goes. 973 AD is the first recorded one, all referencing, again, the supremacy of God right from the very beginning for over almost 1,100 years now. So I'm going to bring that to their attention. They need to know this is not something that just came about in the Middle Ages. This has always been the case. Now, in the O'Donoghue case in 2003, the Court of Appeal upheld the Supreme Court of Ontario's case, and they pointed out that the Act of Settlement and the impugned portions of it are part of the rules of succession, governing succession to the Crown. They confirmed that only the Protestant heirs can hold the Crown from that point forward. And these documents, the Act of Settlement, the Bill of Rights, Coronation Oath, were all recognized as part of our Constitution by the Ontario Court of Appeal. Canada was established, spelling error here, but as a constitutional monarchy. And this aspect is recognized and maintained in the Constitution Act. And Carney was correct. We are a constitutional monarchy with the King at the top, and it permeates our entire constitutional, legal, lawful structure in Canada. And the original oath from 1688 is clear that whereas by the law and ancient usage of the realm, this was already the case, and this act is just recognizing that which already has been the case for decades and centuries, that they had to take an oath at their coronations and to protect people in their spiritual and civil rights and properties. Folks, this is where your property rights are recognized. They don't come from the Constitution. Property rights came from God in the Ten Commandments when God said, "Thou shalt not steal." That's where it was first recognized that God said you have property rights. All this does is recognize that you have those property rights. And the best thing that ever happened is that they were never, ever put into the charter, ever. That was the best thing that ever happened. So they have to protect us in our property rights. And that's part of what it says here, according to the statutes in Parliament agreed and the laws and customs of same. What are our laws and customs? It's a common law. Goes back to the Bible and the protection of property. And the whole purpose, as Frederick Bastiat said in the book, The Law, which I urge everybody to get a copy of, it's free online, was very clear. The whole purpose of people coming into society was to protect us in our property rights, because it's easier to protect with a group of people to protect your property than just one individual, right? Will you cause, in your power, cause law and justice and mercy to be executed, so you don't go to jail for 20 years on a parking ticket, and so kings and parliament do not abuse their powers and basically jail people for nothing? And of course, the most important part, will you, to the utmost of your power, maintain the laws of God, the true profession of the gospel, and the Protestant Reformed religion established by law? Again, established by law. It already exists. And all this act and the wording of it here is to solidify in a statute that which already exists. And the king had to give royal assent to this as well. Every king and queen has had to take it. Queen Elizabeth took it in 1953, and King Chucky took it in 3 years ago. He took it as well. And the thing about King Charles is he tried to get it changed, and he couldn't do it. The Archbishop said, no, we cannot do it. And I'll come back to something like that in a minute. But this is part of our Constitution. It is the limitation of all powers. And when Queen Elizabeth signed the charter, she did it because her power came from the Coronation Oath. That's where she got the power from. She was the one that signed it, but it didn't just come out of nowhere. And there were limitations. So in the Coronation Oath, to uphold the Protestant Christian religion, she could not sign the Canada Act in 1982 and the Charter if it recognized any other God other than the Christian God. She didn't have that power to do that. Now, the oath is administered to all kings and queens who shall succeed in that power, and in the presence of all persons that shall be attending, assisting, or otherwise present at their coronations, any law, statute, or usage notwithstanding. In other words, this law cannot be changed. You cannot pass a statute to change it. It's there. You have to take it. It's the law. And if you don't want to take it, then you decline to be king or queen. But this is what O'Donoghue, the Ontario Court of Appeal, recognized in the Coronation Oath Act, that you cannot pass a statute to take away the king's obligation to protect Christianity in our law. You cannot do it. It's there. It's our law. I think this is pretty straightforward. It's just a recognition that the king recognizes our rights, and he's not going to go in and basically take them away. And the whole ceremony, every part of it is religious based, Christian based. Whether it's the orb, the in this case the king, the ring, the sword that's given to protect the defenseless, every part of it, including the anointing with the oils that goes back to King Solomon. That's where the history comes from anointing the king. And that goes back to King Solomon, folks. All of this whole ceremony is Christian based. And as I pointed out earlier, in Halsbury's Laws of England confirms, it is a contract. If they break the contract, you can refuse to comply with those terms that the king has broken. Peacefully, of course, and simply refuse to comply. That's the benefit of having a contract. And finally, I just want to tell all our members of Parliament and deal with their powers and what they have to do. And the first thing they need to know, of course, is that Parliament, it's actually called her, well, in this case, my slides were back when Queen Elizabeth was here, but it's now His Majesty the King and right at Parliament. And it's a body politic with the, like similar to a corporation, you have the king and his head and peers and commons as members. Call them directors, somebody's going to be the president, and that's the king. And that's the way it's looked at right now with respect to Parliament. It is not supreme. And supreme, when they talk about parliamentary supremacy is relative. They're not owners. They don't own everything. We do, the people do. And when we talk about the Parliament being supreme, as they do in England, for example, it just means it's supreme to all the lower powers underneath it. That's all. it does not mean the king is supreme in the sense of being absolute. He is not. If the king was absolute, there would be no need for a constitution or a coronation oath in the first place. You would have an absolute monarchy who could do whatever they wanted. The fact that there is a constitution means that the king is limited to what he can do. Now, Dicey pointed out the same thing. A former law professor and judge out of England, I believe, if I remember correctly, that basically he points out that everybody knows Parliament is not supreme. So as a member of Parliament and a member of the legislature in Canada, you are not supreme. Let's establish that. We know God is supreme in our law. The Coronation Oath is there protecting God. And as a member of Parliament, you are not supreme and you cannot vote for bills that violate our fundamental law because you don't have the power. Parliament is not supreme. The members of Parliament are not supreme. And the powers as an MP specifically come from Section 91 of the BNA Act. It's there for you to aid and advise the Queen, or in this case, the King, and that's it. And that includes senators. All your power is there to aid and advise, to recommend bills to be passed. Your power is not absolute. And if there's a conflict between aiding and advising the king and breaking the Liberal Party whip or prime minister, at some point your conscience will have to govern. Who do you comply with? Carney or your oath to the king? Even the Privy Council, they're the same. They're there is to aid and advise the government of Canada, and they are recognized in their oath as a servant. And they're a servant of the king, not Parliament. I like that word servant. And you'll notice it does not say a servant of people, it says a servant of, in this case, the Queen or King Charles today. And he will do as faithful and true servant ought to do. If you are an employee, are you going to tell your boss to do something that's illegal? I don't think so. You won't be working there very long. All of these civil servants, ministers, cabinet ministers, MPs, they cannot advise the king to break his oath. And that was exactly what was asked to Lord Mackay years ago. And he responded and he said the idea of the coronation oath was that it would never be in conflict with the advice, and therefore it is the responsibility of ministers of the crown to see that whatever advice they give is consistent with the proper construction of the coronation oath. When I'm talking to a member of parliament, an MLA, who has the power to give royal assent, or to vote for bills, they need to know the duty lies on them not to advise the king to break their oath. That's their duty. And that duty overrides party politics or any partisan influences that they may get or have. And I really want to emphasize this. If you're talking to MPs, MLAs, government officials, everything is secondary. Everything is secondary to their oath of office and oath of allegiance, especially the oath of allegiance to the king, and they cannot advise the king to break the oath any more than they can tell the king to break the charter, for example. And that oath is required by our Constitution in Section 127 of then the BNA Act. And it says every member of the Senate and House of Commons has to take the oath set out in the schedule of the Constitution of the BNA Act at that time. They have to take it. It's part of the Constitution, and you cannot constitutionally sit unless you take this oath. I want all MPs to know, do you know what this oath means when you take it? Tell me. I'm talking to you as my MP. You tell me what that oath means that you took and what duties it imparts upon you. I want you to tell me. And if you can't, then you swore out a false oath and you shouldn't be sitting. And that's where the oath is. It's a lot shorter than what it used to be back in the 30s, but the emphasis is the same. Fidelity, loyalty to the king, to expose treasonous, traitorous corruptions to the king so he's aware of them, I submit to you, all the immigrants coming into Canada right now who do not believe in God from third world countries that are being allowed in our country, somebody in government has an oath and a duty to tell the king what you're doing is wrong. And nobody's doing that right now. And again, former Premier Mike Harris pointed out that the oath to the Queen is fundamental. And again, it's the king today, to the administration of law in this country. In Canada, justice is done in the name of the king. It's not done in the name of Parliament or the Senate or the Prime Minister. We need to have all our MPs and MLAs recognize your orders do not come from the Prime Minister or the leader of the party. They come from your oath and your oath to the king. And that requires basically an oath of fidelity to the king. And that oath overrides your signature to the Conservative or the Liberals or the NDP or any other political party. Even as an independent, your oath governs. I want all government officials, MPs, MLAs to know nothing is basically superior to your oath to the king. That is what governs. And of course, those whose function is to enforce the law have to observe the law themselves. So all the members of the executive, all of you, and all the cabinet ministers are required to make sure you do not tell the king to break the law. Right now, this is our hierarchy. God's laws are supreme. You have the rule of law, which governs all officials and says that you cannot break the law, which is God's law. Then you have our constitutional law, which protects all this, and then you have statute law at the bottom. What governments are trying to tell you is that statute law overrides God's laws, and I'm telling you it does not. They are lying. They are lying to us. And I've got about 10 more slides and I'll be done. King George III was asked and commented about this, and somebody who wanted him to break his oath, and he said very clearly, "Where is the power on earth to absolve me from the observance of every sentence of that oath, particularly the one requiring me to maintain the Protestant Reformed religion?" Emphasis on the word particularly there. He's emphasizing that is the most important. "Was not my family seated on the throne for that express purpose, and shall I be the first to suffer it to be undermined, perhaps overturned? No, I had rather beg my bread from door to door throughout Europe than consent to any such measure. I can give up my crown and retire from power. I can quit my palace and live in a cottage. I can lay my head on a block and lose my life, but I cannot break my oath. If I violate that oath, I'm no longer legal sovereign in this country, and that applies to every king and queen today, including King Charles. If he breaks his oath, if the Governor General breaks their oath, they are not legal sovereign in this country, Canada. If they pass laws that violate the laws of God, they are not the legal sovereign. And you have every power and law to refuse to comply with them." I like this quote. It's a really stark admission from a former king, that the oath is binding and he cannot break it. And in 1953, I just want to point out that they changed the oath. They tried to change it illegally. And it was very interesting because the Coronation Oath can only be changed with consent of all provinces, all Commonwealth countries, the Parliament of England, and the King. Everyone has to agree if changes are going to be made. That never happened. So Una Gay, who is Parliamentary Counsel in England, very high up, pointed out that the Coronation Oath was modified without statutory authority. The present Queen swore a slightly different version, although it still included a promise to maintain the Protestant religion. So that part is there, and they have not got out of it. And in 1937, a whole bunch of people recognized that the changing was done illegally. This was the first one after the Statute of Westminster. They changed the oath illegally. And I say that because I stand by the original oath in the Coronation Oath Act, not by the one that was passed illegally. And even in the London Times, they pointed out it was illegal. And the Archbishop well, we'll get that in a second, but they assumed they had the right to break the law. And the whole purpose of the oath is to restrain royal prerogative and, of course, what Parliament is doing. So by altering the oath, they were claiming by their own motion to vary the terms on which Parliament permitted them to hold office. The result in 1937 was that Archbishop Lang at the coronation had to depart from the law at the very moment he's most solemnly adjuring the king to obey it. For only Parliament can give lawful authority to a new oath. And yet, by giving authority to a new oath with Parliament, it can only be done if the king signs off on it as well. All of them have to be involved. And that did not happen in 1937. It was rushed through by cabinet only. These were the original words on top, and these are the words on the bottom. And they added Canada, Australia, New Zealand. They added these countries and said according to their laws and customs. But as king, the king can still not give royal assent in Canada to any law that violates his oath, which is the supremacy of God. So that still applies in Canada in any event, as it does with all the other countries. And I point this out that you cannot cross your fingers when you're taking the oath. You cannot cross it and say, I'm taking the oath, and then tomorrow go and break it. It applies in its entirety, as the former king said just a few seconds ago. This is the original wording, as I pointed out earlier, to maintain the laws of God. This is what they implied in 1937, and they just added about maintain the laws of God, and they changed it to United Kingdom, and the Protestant Reformed religion is still there, and to maintain the church. This was not altered in any way, in any meaningful way anyway. The laws of God were still there to be preserved by the king. So I'm grateful that they didn't try to get that through. And as stated by Prime Minister St. Laurent to the House during debate on the bill, Her Majesty is now Queen of Canada, but she is Queen because she's Queen of the United Kingdom. It is not a separate office. It is the sovereign who is recognized as sovereign of the United Kingdom, who is our sovereign. And this is, by the way, upheld by the Court of Appeal in the O'Donoghue case. And the rules of succession and the requirement that they be the same as Great Britain are necessary to the proper functioning of our constitutional monarchy, and therefore the rules are not subject to charter scrutiny. The charter does not apply to the Coronation Oath. The Ontario Court of Appeal already just recognized that. And as former Prime Minister admitted that there is only one king, and that's a king for the entire Commonwealth. And finally, I just point out that one cannot accept the monarch, but reject the legitimacy or legality by which the monarch is selected. We in Canada have accepted the king. You accept it in its entirety. And that's the preservation of the supremacy of God in our law. So in conclusion, that's what I'm going to tell MPs and MLAs. And I urge you to do that as well. Establish, number one, the supremacy of God in our law, so they know where you're coming from, and don't just say, well, that's not true, Canada passed the charter, and so on. And then you rebut that by pointing out the oath, how the oath works, and how the charter cannot override the oath, and that's upheld by the Supreme Court of Canada, that the charter is not over and above the law. So when it says religion in the charter, that is underneath the supremacy of God in our law. And then finally, as a member of Parliament or an MLA, these are your duties pursuant to the oath that you took in order to hold that office. Without taking that oath, you could not hold that office. And I'm holding you to those duties right now. When bills come up, you better not vote on them if they violate God's laws, or we will do everything in our power to get you removed from office any way we can, including the next election. And I mean legally, of course. So maybe there might be an injunction or court action to get against them. I'm not sure yet. But ultimately, we will try everything in our power to make sure that you don't vote on these bills again. That's what I want to get across to all the MPs and MLAs in Canada as to what their duties are and where they come from. And it's critical that they know that you know, and that you're upholding your rights, because your rights come from the oath and come from that contract to the king. Your rights do not come from Parliament, and you're upholding them. I'm grateful, as Tanya mentioned earlier, that yeah, we met in 2020 on the legislative grounds, and when I first asked her if she was aware of the oath, she didn't know, and I'm just so grateful she had an open mind to say, yes, David, let's get together and meet. That agreement, that willingness to meet, has allowed us to come this far and be able to get this information out to so many people who are not aware of it in Canada. And it's going to get better and better as more and more people become aware of it. And as more MPs and MLAs realize this is the only basis that you hold power and sit in that office are these oaths. I'm grateful for just allowing me on the show again to speak, because we need to get it out there that this overrides the charter and overrides all other laws in Canada.
Absolutely, David. That was such an informative and educational presentation, and we thank you for that. It was very simple, straightforward, factual, to the point. And we are going to be asking everyone possible, like not just the viewers, we're asking you to share this video with friends, family, co-workers, get a team together, join Action for Canada, start a chapter in your community, because we're expecting that you're going to take this information and start lobbying your local government. It is critical. As I say, knowledge is power. When you have it, you've got to share it. You've got a responsibility. I don't want to hear anybody complaining about the direction that Canada is going if you are not willing to do your part. It can't just be David and I that are front lining this campaign in Canada for the past 6 years. David is right. As soon as he told me about this, I was like, David, tell me more. And he has all of the knowledge and 30 years experience in educating himself on all of these and investigating these facts and truths of our binding documents that establish this nation. And the Lord has blessed me with a national organization to then take that information and spread it Canada-wide. And as all of you know, I can repeat it time and time again, that there are some communities where our chapter leaders maybe only have 2 or 3 people that are active, but we're having great wins. So if you consider the state that Canada is in, if you consider who it is that Carney has handpicked to be the next Governor General, after hearing David's presentation and now understanding what a threat that Louise Arbour poses to Canada and to our future, and that she needs to be reassessed for her suitability to be the Governor General based on her history, her career, her ties to the United Nations. And, David, I think I'll just take just a short opportunity to remind people again as to who she is and what she's been involved in. So she is a former Supreme Court of Canada Justice, Ontario Court of Appeal Judge, and UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. She was the UN Chief Prosecutor for the International Criminal Tribunals, UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, UN Special Representative for International Migration, deeply embedded in UN global governments, supported Suave vs. Canada, granted voting rights to federal prisoners, blocked a BC school from removing books featuring same-sex parented families on religious grounds. In 2022, Arbour attacked the Canadian Armed Forces' toxic culture of misogyny and glorification of masculinity. This is the woman that's going to oversee our military, and that when our Parliament is in violation of their oath of office, do we really believe or expect that Louise Arbour will do her job based on the oath that she's sworn to uphold it and shut down that Parliament? Would she bring in the military that she is criticizing? When we hear her anti-white male military comments, I'm going to quote it again. If you just recruit white boys who like guns but don't like women or anybody else who doesn't look like them, you'll perpetuate that culture. And then finally, I am going to read once again her comments about and dismissing the concerns, the reasonable concerns that we have over foreigners coming into Canada that will never and have no desire to align with our culture and our way of life, but are transplanting their failed foreign systems of governance from their third world countries into Canada, and it's dragging us down. And she's telling us that won't change the social fabric. And then she wants us to embrace a future in which our children will develop their own culture, fully open to that of others, rather than stagnate in isolation. This is not a person who can take this sacred place as Governor General. And David, I do have a question for you. When I take a look at this, there was that bishop, and Bishop Dewar. He was a high-ranking bishop in England, and he did a video that went viral because he read a letter that he had written to King Charles for being in violation of the oath. So for those officials in Canada that say the oath is merely ceremonial, here you have a bishop in the UK who is calling out the king for being in violation of the Coronation Oath, which means to me that is further to support what we're saying, that this is a living, breathing, binding document. So how do we get rid of King Charles? I'd like to get in touch with that bishop actually and say, let's work together in this and overturn this treason, that's happening right now.
Yeah, I agree. And somebody had a question about in the chat about a living tree doctrine as well, and that all that issue is under the laws of God. So if something happens today that is a new issue that didn't exist, it gets pigeonholed into the laws of God. And if it doesn't, and the laws of God prohibit it, then it's not to be done, pure and simple. And that that quote that you just commented about from Priest, I can't remember. I always get them mixed up. He was very correct, and I wish more of them would contact our governments and the Attorney Governor General and put that same comment to them, that we are holding you to these oaths, and you have a duty to uphold God's laws, and we want you to know that we know about it, and we're holding you to it, because that is so correct about what he was saying to them. How do you get rid of the Governor General? You know what? I don't have an answer for that at the present, other than holding them accountable and refusing to comply with any legislation that is given royal assent that violates God's laws. It takes courage, absolutely. But if they have broken the law, all change takes place by somebody saying, no, I'm not going to comply. It doesn't take place by somebody saying, what you did was wrong, but I'm going to do it I'm going to comply with it anyway. So we need to know that, and Louise Arbour needs to know, if she's going to give royal assent to bills that eventually become law and violate God's laws, that people, lots of them, will not comply with it.
Well, and David, yeah, you've answered that question in a roundabout way, which was peaceful civil disobedience. We saw that last Saturday with Tommy Robinson's huge, massive rally in the United States. People came out peacefully in civil disobedience against Armour and the government, and that is paying off. And they just had a massive win in the UK where they had a local election, and they had 1,400 seats that they took back as far as councillors are concerned. And that is destroying the Starmer cabal in the UK. It's taking them right down. And so we can see that he's on his last legs, although he doesn't want to admit it. He looks quite foolish as he stands up there and thinks that he can still turn this around. So civil disobedience is very, very important. What Action for Canada is doing along with you in the letter writing campaigns that we commenced in December against Bill C9, because that is it is so vitally important to what we're talking about here, because Bill C9, I think, is one of the worst bills that they've passed in the last 11 years to criminalize scripture. This is an attack against Christianity. These are very evil, anti-God people that are behind this. And I even believe, you and I were discussing this, that this change of governor, they said, well, she kind of has a 5-year term, Mary Simon, and her 5-year term was coming up. Although I don't know that it actually specifies clearly that it's only 5 term. I believe a governor general, if the government decides, can even be in that position longer. But isn't it interesting that we've been lobbying government for the last 5 months, specifically on the coronation oath and their duties and their limitations of power, and directing it at Mary Simons that she cannot give Bill C-9 royal assent because it's in direct violation of biblical principles and the Bible itself. So we encourage people to come on to Action for Canada's website. Even reading the letter that David wrote to the Governor General, he then wrote one to the MPs and then one directed at the senators to explain to them all of their limitations in powers and their duties. And so I encourage you that you go to Action for Canada's webpage. You can look up the Bill C-9, you'll see those actions. I just want to bring up the Coronation Oath page that we've created. If you go to our menu, go under current issues. This is if you want to learn more about this and get a crash course. We've got great information there because David, as I said, has been coming on for years. You can see third down, it says Coronation Oath, super easy for you to access. And then if you just scroll down the page, there's a few videos talking about property rights at the top and the coronation oath in the Constitution. We've provided the resources, the letters I was talking about to the Governor General and the Member of Parliament and Senators. You can see all of those at the top of the page for easy access. And then down at the bottom are further Empower Hours that we've had with David talking about all of these important issues. We would encourage you to watch one at a time, watch one a week and get educated so that when you go in and you sit down and talk to your MLA, MPP, Member of Parliament, maybe it's your mayor. Who knows who it is you're going to have a conversation with, but if you can just continue to put this information in, what goes in is what comes out. And you need to be convincing, which means you need to be educated. And so, as David also said at the beginning of his presentation, that nobody has ever addressed the Governor General in passing and giving royal assent to bills that were in violation of the oath and bringing awareness to the coronation oath. And we believe, because we've been at this 6 years, we can see that momentum is building. David and I have been speaking at events. I mentioned it in front of 700 people at the event in Red Deer the other day. And I said, hey, are you aware that this is the coronation oath and that this is key to our freedoms and having victory in this country? And you could almost hear a gasp from 700 people to hear the coronation oath. I've never heard about that. Because they're not talking about it ever in social studies or teaching our kids about this in school because they're threatened about it. And then finally, I believe that goes back to why Carney has handpicked Louise Arbour, because we believe that in the 5 months of educating and lambasting Mary Simon's office and Carney with the letters telling them about the coronation oath, we believe this is the threat. We believe that this is legitimate to turning this around, but we need all hands on deck. Join Action for Canada. Sign up with David Lindsay to get his letters. But David and I, as we've worked together, the majority of the actions are all on Action for Canada's page. So we always have a balance in sharing the responsibility here, as David and I have partnered up with many years to bring awareness to this critically important document. So, David, is there anything that you would have to say in closing regarding this?
The only thing I just want to mention is that one thing I've talked about in the past is that there's only 4 ways to get justice. You have war, you have civil disobedience, you've got justice, the legal system, and you have political. Right now, we're focused on the political system, and the legal system is coming up once some of these bills get passed. And peaceful civil disobedience is always there to simply say, no, we're not going to comply. War is not an option. They got the guns, and then invariably the people who are running the war, they get into power and they get corrupted, and the whole cycle starts over again. So we need to focus on all 3 at once if we're going to get success, and make sure they know that we're not going to comply if they break the law, and we will use every political and legal method possible to do that. And I think your point is correct. It's interesting that suddenly, before these bills are going to get royal assent, they're bringing in a globalist And who knows, maybe Mary Simon got this information and said, whoa, I can't do this.
Mm-hmm.
And they decided to get rid of her pretty quick. In politics, nothing happens by chance, right?
I believe that's true because if anybody can push anything, we know that the Liberals are going to do that and overstep. I really wanted to wrap the show up within an hour. We can edit it down a bit because I want people to be able to share this video. We may make it just totally separate on your presentation, David, in order to make this a working resource for people. But some people have asked a question, and I don't want to end the show before maybe we've covered some of those. I know that, Liz, you've put out there about, okay, so we lobby government, and there's going to be elected officials that are going to dismiss it and laugh at it. But you know what? That's part and parcel. And that's where continuing to lobby the government, being the squeaky wheel, helping to hold them to account, possibly court actions will be coming on this. You can see it's kind of undeniable that we'll have to move forward with legal actions because we can't continue to have them just dismissing this. It's binding. And if we don't have a fire in our belly about this and the fact that it's true and binding, then why would we expect anybody else? Why are we accepting the lies of the Liberals and feeling victimized by it rather than proclaiming the truth, standing firm and hard on it, and moving forward with it? And that's what Action for Canada has been doing when we've been lobbying government over the SOGI issue in Saskatchewan and getting it, making sure it got removed. You see the books coming down in Alberta, and you see them. Next step is removing SOGI. They're committed to doing that. SOGI, CRT, DEI, and land acknowledgements that comes from being the squeaky wheel. So don't go, you know what, they're not going to believe us. Look at all the foreigners sitting in office right now. Why would these Hindus and Sikhs and Muslims that are pushing their agenda listen to what we have to say? So we have to hold them to the oath, and we're going to need to continue to press in on this. And these people need to be removed from office. Yes, David.
Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to make one further comment. If you remember on the slide I showed you about the Coronation Oath Act, the king has a constitutional duty to protect us and our property rights, not to protect any foreigners or Indians or anybody else. The oath is to us, his subjects, to protect us in our property rights. So when we look at what's happening on Indian land in some of these court cases that have come up, the judges who are sworn in a oath of allegiance to the king, they are bound by that as well to protect us. And the fee simple that we have is with the king. So the king, in my opinion, has a constitutional duty to protect everybody, all those landowners under the torrent system, to protect them and their property rights as well, even in fee simple. And I think that is something that eventually lawyers are going to need to look at. But as you know, with the lawyer we talked to last year, she came up and said, David, and she said to you, Tanya, we never got taught any of this in law school. We need to get that information out to them because that is where the protection of property and those landowners are going to come from.
Right. And if anybody viewing this knows a lawyer, we're praying. We've been praying for years to find a lawyer with a fire in their belly that has a clear, deep understanding of the Coronation Oath and is willing to learn so that we can put forth cases. It's going to be critical. It's coming. They can't just sidestep this, and we can't permit them to do that. Henry has asked, what do you say to people who claim that we do not have a constitution because it was never ratified by the unanimous consent of the provinces?
I did an email on that. I think they're referring to the section in the Constitution Act of 82 where Quebec had to come on board. That was given by declaration proclamation by the Queen. I forget the year, 85, 84, somewhere in the 80s. And they weren't necessary. Quebec wasn't necessary to sign that. People have interpreted that section incorrectly. And maybe at some point with our email going out in the next week or two, I'll address that by resending that email because I went into it in length into the legal aspects of that, but Quebec wasn't really required to sign that. So I'll send that in an email. But as for the fact that the provinces have not all signed on, the only one that hasn't signed on is Quebec. So I'll address that in an email and I'll put that out in our newsletter next week.
Okay. And so how can people sign up to your newsletter?
They can just email us at clearbc. Oh no.
Clear. 2012.
Clear 2012, that's our website, Clear 2012 at pm.me.
Good, great. And that's just below David's name as well, under his image. And so, David, I just want to thank you so much for the time that you take to put the presentations together, your clarity in presenting, and for helping to be on the front line of educating this nation so that we can together save Canada. and
thanks. I'm in all of this on too. Thank you.
Yeah, in all of this, we need to pray. We need to submit ourselves to God and pray for miracles. All right, do you have any closing words for our audience?
I'm just grateful for their support. Hopefully they will do something and approach their MLAs and MPs. Keep on them right through to the next election. Keep on them, all of them, wherever your provincial elections are going to be. And otherwise, I just look forward to hearing your in prayer.
Okay, thank you, David. Okay, so I just want to remind everybody, if you haven't signed up with Action for Canada, please do so. Go onto our website, Action with the number 4. You can see it all over the page there, right here, actionforcanada.com. We're going to be doing a very important call to action. I hope to get it out tomorrow night, so it's in your inbox on Friday morning. And it is going to be directed at Carney, as I've mentioned several times through this presentation, to reassess the suitability for Louise Arbour to actually be sworn in officially on June 8th to take on the role as our new Governor General. I think we can do much, much better than this. All right. So next week, our guest is going to be Ashley Vance. I was speaking at an amazing event on Saturday about the subject of conception, about a baby's right in the womb. And we don't mean that in the United Nations way or the way they want to take control of our children, but that the right of a child to have a mother and father, for instance, and to be able to succeed and thrive. And so that was one of the speakers. Another one was about IVF. And then Ashley had come on and she was telling us about the abortion pill reversal. Are you aware that such a pill even exists? And so far, over 8,000 babies have been saved. And I think the abortion issue is, it is long overdue that this has to become front and center of our conversations and upcoming elections. I keep saying we need to start raising up incredible, great, principled, godly leaders right now. We need the public and communities to already start getting to know them so that when they walk up and vote on election day, you know, they're just not spinning the wheel and saying, yeah, maybe I'll go with that one. All right, we need to know who we're voting for and where they stand on these critically important issues. And so that will be on the page that I've prepared today that will be going out on Sunday night. We always send out the weekly email Sunday nights into your inbox Monday, talking about the next guest and then providing solutions within that email. So what can you do? So I've created a great message today. I'm excited to get it out to you. I'm excited to learn, to have you hear the presentation that Ashley has in bringing awareness to the abortion pill reversal. They're being terribly censored, of course, because the abortion industry doesn't want you knowing about this. And it is a natural a treatment within a short period of time of after taking that first abortion pill that you can have success by taking the abortion pill reversal, which is progesterone, to turn that around and save the baby. And it's absolutely amazing. I'm so excited about it. So make sure you join us next week. The verse for today is from Jeremiah 22, 3-5. Thus saith the Lord, execute ye judgment and righteousness, and deliver the spoiled out of the hand of the oppressor, and do no wrong, do no violence to the stranger, the fatherless, nor the widow, neither shed innocent blood in this place. For if you do this thing indeed, then shall there enter in by the gates of this house kings sitting upon the throne of David, riding in chariots and on horses, he and his servants and his people. In other words, you will be blessed. You know, if you treat people right, if you help those that are in need, but it's got a great warning. But if you will not hear these words, I swear by myself, saith the Lord, that this house shall become a desolation. And that's what I see over all of these leaders like Starmer and Macron and Justin Trudeau and Mark Carney. It is not going to go well for them. And the word of God continually, repeatedly says this. Now, God does allow really crummy leaders to rise up for a period of time when people have turned on God and the word of God. And that's where we're at in Canada. So it is long overdue for us to get right with God, to repent about allowing all of these false gods to set themselves up in Canada. We got to shut down all the mosques and temples. Those are idols and worships and false gods. These are not other religions. There is no such thing as the word religion to address false gods in the Bible. They're actually called false gods. The freedom of religion that's in our charter, and this is straight from Brian Peckford, the last living signatory of the charter, said the freedom of religion was included to keep the government out of the business of the church. And so these are the truths that we are trying to repeat and repeat to bring to the front lines until they're once again the truth again and being embraced, because they are essential to us maintaining Canada as a Christian nation, which, as David had said in the presentation, is literally the best form of government based on Christian principles that you could possibly have in the whole world. And so on that, I look forward to seeing you next week. God bless you, and God bless Canada.
Chapters across the nation. We are going to be in every town and every city, and we are going to build communities within these communities of like-minded people who are actually going to care for one another again and love on each other and give each other the help when they're down. We are going to use the teams and the people that build within chapters to support our businesses. The government's actions are completely 100% unlawful. Judgment will again be found on justice, and those with virtuous hearts will pursue it. You have a virtuous heart if you are here today pursuing freedom and righteousness. And then verse 23 comes along with a promise. God says He will turn the sins of evil people back on them. He will destroy them for their sins. I take great comfort in that, because I serve a mighty living God who has allowed us to go through this season of discomfort because we as a nation had turned our backs on Him, and we need to get right. So I am just going to thank you so much. I'm going to say God bless you and God bless Canada.